Gemara was dealing. It started with the concept, the sugya of Zika. The Gemara brings that there's a machlokes of whether or not there is Zika. That means Reuven dies, his wife is his widow. He dies childless, and he has a widow wife who is going to be the Yevamah, right, to brothers, to Yavam. And the question now is, if the surviving brother, who's the Yavam, who's supposed to do Yibum, does that person now become prohibited in her relatives? Because for a moment, he inherited the deceased brother's marriage. He had an obligation of Yibum to this woman. So essentially, it's his wife's mother, and should be, or wife's sister, or wife's daughter. Are her relatives automatically usher to him? That was the Gemara's question. And the Gemara brought a machlokes of whether yesh Zika or ein Zika. Do we say there's Zika, this concept of the transference of the marriage from the deceased brother or not? And we see that in the Gemara that it's essentially a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. And we started off last week, just as an introduction to this concept, that of course everybody has to admit that there is Zika. And without really proving it, I just said, look at Rashi. Rashi's, instead of taking the Gemara at face value and saying, one opinion says, yesh Zika, therefore it counts as if they're married and he's prohibited to the mother or sister or daughter, etc., her relatives. And the other says, no, that this widow's relatives are not prohibited to the brother, to the surviving brother who's supposed to do Ibum. And the Gemara made a distinction whether there's one brother or two brother, or perhaps thought maybe there's such a distinction. And Rashi, instead of just saying yesh Zika or ein Zika, Rashi says, is Zika strong enough to prohibit, or is Zika not strong enough to prohibit this relative? Meaning, everybody agrees this Zika. So let's begin with, how do we know, or why do we say that there's even, that it has to be that there is Zika? So actually, to start this off, we have a Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin starts off with that there are three ways of affecting proper marriage. B'kesef, b'shtar, b'chazaka. With kesef, monetary value, so that's what we do, a ring or any monetary value. Mishtar, you can make a document, or bebia, which is consummating the marriage. So those are three ways of actually creating kiddushin. And the Gemara looks for a source for each one of these, and the Gemara says, why can't I just learn the source for bia, for consummating the marriage, from Yibum? We say kal v'chomer. If it works, if it works for Yibum, it should work here. Okay. The point that I want to get to is the Gemara's response. The Gemara says, no, you cannot learn from there, because there you already have a Zika. You already have a Zika. Oh, whereas over here you don't have Zika. Meaning, we can't learn doing the Kiddushin, the beginning of the Kinyan Kiddushin, of affecting Kiddushin, to be done, and we'll learn that from somewhere where it's not the beginning, because there already is a Zika, there's already a Kiddushin transferred, there's already something going on. And Rashi over there, the words of Rashi, give me a moment, sorry. And Rashi says over there that Yibum is not a beginning of an acquisition. It's not a beginning of affecting the Kiddushin. It's completing what was already started. So it's sort of like chuppah after Kiddushin as opposed to the Kiddushin itself. So you see, it's in the Mavur in the Gemara that there is Zika, because that's the source, that's the reason that we need a pasuk to tell you that B is kind of a kiddushin. Why didn't I just say what I need a pasuk for? I have at least one opinion holds that there's no Zika. So you see clearly there's Zika. Furthermore, there's Tosfos over here. Tosfos has a question of whether or not Yibum is going to work enough that if someone is a shomeres yavam to a kohen, can she eat teruma? That means she was married to a kohen. She's a non-kohen that's married to a kohen. The halacha is a non-kohen married to a kohen eats teruma because her husband eats teruma. She dies childless. He dies childless. She has no children from him. So then she no longer can eat teruma on the basis of her relationship with her husband because that's ended. To which the Gemara deals with on Daf Samach Zayin. What about a Yevomos? What about a Shemeres Yevamot? A woman waiting for Yibum. Can she eat teruma? She can't eat teruma on the basis of her deceased husband because he's dead. But what about on the basis of the Yavam? And the Gemara deals with that. And the Gemara says that they cannot eat. That she cannot eat teruma on the basis of that. And Tosfos says that's only a d'Rabbanan. Midoraisa, of course you can eat teruma because there's a Zika. Midoraisa, there's a Zika. Of course they can eat teruma. So you see again, Tosfos is holding. Everybody's going to hold that there is a concept of Zika. There is a concept of a transference of the kiddushin from the deceased brother to the surviving brother, and that creates an existent kiddushin that bonds them enough that they would be allowed, that she would be allowed to eat teruma on a Torah level. It's only on a rabbinic level. Midrabanan Chazal say no, that you don't. So we see again that the concept of Zika has to be there. And not only that, we'd have to say that Zika is the Oraisa. Zika is a Torah concept. In the Torah basic concept of Yibum, there is a transference of the Kiddushin from the deceased brother on a Torah level, because if you can eat teruma, it must be a Torah level. So it must be that there's a Torah level transference of Kiddushin and there is Zika. So when the Gemara says Ein Zika, that's where Rashi has to say, it cannot mean Ein Zika, there's no Zika at all. Like we see in the Gemara Kiddushin, that Yibum is going to complete a marriage. It's not the beginning of the marriage. There's already a marriage in place from the brother. There's a Zika. So what does the Gemara therefore mean that Ein Zika? Must be that the Gemara means Ein Zika. It's not strong enough to create a prohibition, the Isser to the widows, the surviving brothers will not be prohibited to the widow's mother, sister, daughter, relative on account of this, because even though there is a transference and there is a marriage, but it's not going to take effect enough. So what's going on and why is that? Furthermore, we have a contradiction seemingly in the Rambam himself. The Rambam, within the Rambam itself, the Rambam as an introduction to the halachas of Yibum and Chalitza, the Rambam says that why is a Yevama not allowed to marry out to anyone to just anybody? Why does she have to wait until Chalitza to marry? Her husband died. Her kiddushin to her husband, her marriage to her husband is over. Why can't she marry? Now, if I was asking that question without the Rambam, I would have responded simply because the Torah says. The Torah says she cannot go. The woman, the wife of the deceased person, cannot marry someone else. Right? but the Rambam doesn't say that. What the Rambam says is because she is a zakuk to the yavam, because she has this connection, this kinyan with the yavam. There's a reshus yavam alel. There's the bond, the domain that's upon her. Now, when we started the Masechta way back when, 18 weeks ago, 17 weeks ago, so in the introduction to the Masechta, we spoke about the pasuk, where the pasuk says, "L'tzia eshes hameis achutza," and the drasha of the Chazal is that we know, that we see, it says the wife of the deceased cannot marry someone else. And the Gemara says, wait, what are you talking about? And we said, one second, what are you talking about, the wife of the deceased? Once he's deceased, it's no longer his wife. Once it's deceased, it's not Eshes Hames, it's not the wife of the deceased, because the marriage is over once he passes away. So we see over here that this is this concept. The reason she can't marry anyone else is because his marriage is not over. There is still some halachic bond that is transferred to the brother, and that's Zika, that is still keeping the previous marriage alive enough that she cannot marry anyone else yet. So now the question is, we see that seemingly the Rambam is saying that Zika is the Oraisa. Zika is a Torah obligation, Torah concept. Yet the Rambam, in speaking about the prohibition of her relatives, says it's rabbinic. He says it's midrabanan. That means Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies childless. Rachel has a sister. Rachel's sister Leah. Shimon says, "Wait, I want to marry the sister, Leah," but he can't. Why can't he marry her? Because he's already tied to the sister Rachel, the widow of his brother, is tied to him, and so this is achos zakukase, the sister of his zakuka, of a woman that has Zika to him, and therefore he's not allowed to marry her. So the Rambam says that prohibition is darabanan. That Isser is a darabanan. Now the question is, wait, if Zika is the Oraisa, Zika is the basis for her prohibition to marry anyone else, so it should be his prohibition as well. There should be a Zika, and he should not be allowed to marry her relatives because of this relationship. So the way the Achronim basically speak about over here and say the structure of Zika is this. Zika, which we're defining as the transference of the brother's marriage, of the deceased brother's marriage to their surviving brother. Now this woman is bonded to him. There are two aspects to marriage. There's ishus, and there's the bond, the commitment, the kinyan. The ishus is not it's not the affecting it. It's not the kinyan. It's not the acquisition. It's not the making of that connection, the reshus, the domain, but rather it is the ishus. It's a connection of marriage, of husband and wife. So there's the commitment, the kinyan, if you would, and then there's the ishus, the relationship part of it. And this comes up in various forms of halacha, where chatzi shifcha, chatzi baschorin, a woman that's partially emancipated. She had two owners. She was a slave. She's emancipated, but from one, not from the other. As soon as she's emancipated, she becomes like a gioris, right? Because she becomes Jewish, and somebody makes kiddushin to her. So they cannot make the kiddushin, cannot take effect on the relationship side, but on the woman, on the isha side, on the husband-wife side, it could. And so we see that these are two separate things that can split. And so that's what the Rosh Yeshiva say as the meaning of this. It's it's seemingly in Rav Chaim, it's seemingly in Rav Nachum. There's various Rosh Yeshiva say this. Rav Shach says it in Avi Ezri. This idea that there are two aspects of Kiddushin. Zika, the Zika that works is a Zika of the kinyan, the Zika of tying the knot, if you would. That transference happens, but only the husband, the deceased husband, had ishus, had a relationship of husband and wife. The Yavam doesn't have that yet. And therefore they say the difference is this. When we're talking about her being allowed to marry out to anybody else, she can't. She's bonded in marriage. There's a reshus that blocks her. There is a kinyan that was transferred over. When we're talking about, so therefore, the Rambam says the basis for the prohibition for her to marry someone else is because she is already bonded, she's already connected to the other. Similarly, when the Gemara in Kiddushin wants to know if we can find the source of kinyan bia, of Kiddushin taking effect through consummating the Kiddushin, the marriage, can we learn it from Yibam? The Gemara says, no, you can't learn it from Yibam because there's already some sort of Zika. Yeah, of course, on a Torah level, there's already a bond. There's already a connection. There's already a kinyan. You cannot learn a new connection from something that already has a connection. Therefore, also for teruma, for eating kodesh, for eating teruma, she is bonded to him on a Torah level. The Tosha says there's going to be his right to eat, her right to eat teruma. The Rabbanan said not to. However, when we're dealing with the Yavam's prohibition of relationship to her relatives, here we have a new level of Zika. Is Zika strong enough to make also a husband-wife type of prohibition? Meaning, her sister should now be prohibited to the Yavam? Why? Maybe ain't Zika. Maybe Zika's not strong enough. Zika's there. But is it strong enough to not only make a bond, a kinyan, a reshus, but also to make a ishus, to make I have a good word for ishus, but a husband-wife bond. A husband-wife bond, that doesn't exist yet. That doesn't exist yet. And therefore, he can marry her sister. The Rabbanan, you cannot. The Rabbanan said, no, don't do that, because since there is some sort of bond, don't break that bond by marrying her sister. But he's not yet in a husband-wife relationship with the Yevama, and therefore, if he marries her sister, he's not marrying his wife's sister, which would be prohibited. He's marrying someone who has a bond connection with him, a kinyan connection with him. Okay, but that's not ishus. Or the other opinion says, no, there is enough yesh Zika and Zika strong enough to even prohibit that. But now the Gemara makes sense. When the Gemara says yesh Zika, ain Zika, it's not a question if there is Zika. Rather, as Rashi says, is the Zika strong enough to also affect the marriage of relatives? That's a higher level. And perhaps for that it won't work. It also explains the question the Gemara had, well, that maybe it's only if there were two surviving brothers, two potential Yavams. But if there's one potential Yavam, it would be Aser. And we asked last week, and we said, wait, what difference does it make? If Zika doesn't affect the connection, so who cares if there's only one brother? So we'll give another explanation for this soon, and we'll mention Rav Naftali Trump's answer on this whole concept. But based on what we're saying here, this makes a lot of sense. When there are two surviving brothers, for sure you can't say there is a marriage bond, there is a ishus bond between the surviving brother and the woman. because there are two surviving brothers and only one can marry her. So for sure, there's not going to be a ishus bond between the yavam and the yavama. However, if there's only one surviving brother, perhaps there the bond is a marriage bond. It is an ishus bond, and therefore she would be, her relatives would be prohibited to him. That's why we needed the chiddush to say that it does not. But the reason the Gemara would even contemplate that difference is based on this idea that there are two aspects to the marriage. There's the bond and the ishus, the marriage bond, the husband and wife bond. That ishus doesn't take effect yet. The connection, the bond, the commitment bond is there. And therefore, there are halachic ramifications in as much as she could eat truma on a Torah level, according to Tosfos, that you can't learn from yibum to kiddushin. But on the other hand, it may not make her relatives prohibited because that's a different type of bond. Now,
may I ask something?
Sure.
So the way that we're explaining it now is that the point of the argument is whether or not the Zika also creates an ishus bond.
Correct.
So would the Rambam be understanding it differently if he's saying that the Zika is a derabanan though?
No, the same. That's what I'm saying. The Rambam in the one place seems it's the Oraisa because it says the reason she may not marry anyone else is on account of this bond, right? Because the Rishus Alel, the Rishus Yevomos Daf, right? Wait, but he also says that her relatives are not prohibited on a Torah level, only the Rabbanan. If her relatives are not usher, so that means that there's not a real bond. So we made the distinction. We say for her relatives to be usher, for her karovas to be prohibited to him, that's a marriage bond. That's based on, is she his wife? Then her family is prohibited to him as a wife. But over here we're saying it's not a wife. It's not yet a marriage bond. It's a commitment bond. There's a reshus. There's a kinyan. For that, that's sufficient to not allow her to marry anyone else, but it does not make her relatives prohibited to this man because they're not yet in a marriage.
Are you assuming that the Rambam is like the Man Da'amar of the Gemara, that there's no Zika?
No. I'm either way, it could be that it's only midrabanan. Zika of this level is only going to be the Rabbanan. How do we know this? How do we know that it's only the Rabbanan? It's actually a Gemara, Daf Hashavua, the Gemara in Amud Beis, Daf Hashavua Amud Beis says explicitly, Zika midrabanan.
So can we explain the opinion of Yesh Zika that there's not only a kinyan connection, but there's an ishus connection? Is that's only on a derabanan level? There's an ishus connection. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
And the other says no, even on the Rabbanan level, it's not there. Or maybe they're arguing on a Torah level, and the other one will agree that on a Rabbanan level it is there. And the Rambam is paskening like the one that says it's the Rabbanan. Either way,
He says muteris la ima, right, or whatever. So, I mean,
but it's also in the Rabbanan.
That'd be kind of a dochik way to read it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So the Gemara on Daf Hashavua does say that it's the Rabbanan, and again, this is going to be a problem if we learn, it's the Rabbanan, and yet we have Tosfos saying that she can eat truma, which tells us the Oraisa. We have the Rambam himself saying that that's the basis for the Isser of Yevama Lashuk, of why this Yevama may not marry anybody else. And if it's just Zika's the Rabbanan, it makes no sense. So we have Rashi over here at the bottom, and Rashi says, why didn't he just say V'lei ma'alacha k'divrei ha'omer ein Zika? Who's the opinion that says there's no Zika? So Rashi says it's Rabbi Akiva, who later on Daf Chav Tesam and Beis says that a shomeres yavam cannot have her vows annulled. We know the halacha is that a woman, when she makes a vow and she's married, so she wants to make sure her husband is going to accept or it's al das bala. She wants to make sure that her husband's going to be okay with the vow. So within 24 hours of him hearing the vow, or within the same day of him hearing the vow, he has to annul it or accept it. What about a yevama? Shomeres yavam. Can her yavam annul the vow or not? So Rabbi Akiva says no. It's a machlokas, and Rabbi Akiva says no. So now, number one, the one who says that you can annul the vow, obviously is going to hold that Zika is d'oraisa. Right? Because otherwise, how do you annul a vow if it's not d'oraisa? It seems that it would have to be d'oraisa. But Rabbi Akiva holds that it's not. Okay? So he holds ein Zika. What does Rashi say? What's the reason? Delokarinim be isha. The reason is because we can't call her his wife. That's why he cannot annul it. Why is Rashi saying that? Why didn't Rashi just say, because there's no Zika?
Nice.
Why does Rashi need a reason? You know why he can't annul her vow? Because you cannot call her his wife.
That's cool.
Rashi should have just said, he holds there's no Zika. It's not. He can't annul the vow because he can't annul anybody else's vow. It's only his wife, and it's not his wife. Why does Rashi say, "Oh, you can't call her wife, his wife"? What Rashi's saying, this idea. Rashi's saying, really, it's a wife. There is a bond there, but not enough to be called wife. It's not a marriage bond yet. Therefore, Rashi says, "The lekarinam be isha." She cannot be called. Her husband is going to annul the vow. It's not a husband yet. Isn't that beautiful? That line in Rashi is so clear once we have this explanation. But without that, you can run by that line and miss. But really, if you think about it, why did Rashi even need to say that? So again, we see in Rashi that really, on a Torah level, there is a connection, and there is a Zika. However, the Zika is not strong enough to make a marriage bond, an ishus bond. And therefore, he cannot, according to Rabbi Akiva, he cannot annul her vows because he's not her husband. It's not a marriage bond. She's not his wife yet. And therefore, her relatives are not going to be prohibited to him because there's no marriage bond yet. There's just a connection, a commitment, a knot tied. So that's Rav Eli Baruch Finkel found this. Well, maybe others did as well, but he brings this Tosfos Rid. Tosfos Rid says such language which really illuminates it like this. This that it says by us that there's ein Zika. The language of the Tosfos Rid is like this: Zika Yevim. Sorry.
Is this an Gemara?
On our Gemara, the Tosfos Rid. It's not in the page, meaning, but it's the Tosfos Rid on our Gemara says this: Zika Yevimta lachashiva ketzad ishus. The on our Gemara where it says there is no Zika, he doesn't say there's no Zika. What he says is the Zika is not important enough to count as ishus. Ketzad ishus. Shete aser ima alav mishum chamase. That her mother would be prohibited to the surviving brother as his mother-in-law. It's not his mother-in-law. I'm going to pick that up for you. I don't know if you can read that. You got it? Top lines.
Okay.
So he says the Zika is not strong enough to be called Ishus. That's the idea. So this, that the Rosh Yeshiva is saying really is found in Arishon, in Tosas Rid. And this, but it illuminates the whole concept of what we're talking about in Zika. Really on a Torah level, for sure there's a Zika. But there are two aspects to marriage. There's the bond, the not being tied, and there's the marriage connection. And that marriage connection is not there. I'm going to cut it short here. There is a contradiction, a stira within the words of the Nemukei Yosef explaining our Gemara. Whatever the contradiction is, I just want to say over the teaching of the Granat, or Naftali Trapa was the Rosh Yeshiva in Radin in the Chafetz Chaim's yeshiva. He explained over here, based on a lot of proofs from various Rishonim, that it'll depend on whether or not the yibum actually falls apart or not. Meaning, if she or he dies prior to them doing yibum, then the Zika never really was a proper Zika. So Zika is sort of a conditional bond. If you end up marrying, then the Zika was a real Zika. And therefore, her relatives would be prohibited. And even now, on the potential that they can marry, it'll be prohibited. But if she dies, so first Reuven died, then his wife Rachel died. Prior to dying, Shimon, the surviving brother, was bonded in Zika to Rachel. And now Rachel died. So the Zika retroactively became a non-existent, non-important Zika. And therefore, on a Torah level, he would be permitted in her relatives. Because it never actually got anywhere. But while there's a potential of the marriage coming, at that point, it's a Da'oraisa Zika. Zika retroactively dissipates at the moment that there's no yibum possible. That's the point that Rabbi Naftali says. It works in some of the sugya. It works in some of the rishonim. Doesn't work at all, but nevertheless, it's a deep concept that works nicely here and is important. And so I just wanted to say that over.
But that would only be if you hold yesh zika but not lachar misa.
Correct.
Zika, but no lachar. No, even if you hold ein Zika, there's still
no. I mean, as opposed to yesh zika, but lachar misa.
Yeah, it gets right. It gets rid of that Zika, that connection. Okay.
No, even if you hold ein Zika, that there's still usher to marry the karuv while one of them's alive.
Yeah, I when I said dafka yesh zika, I was saying to afuke, right? I was going the other direction, but that it wouldn't fit if you hold yesh zika, right?
Even
afil lachar misa, right? Then that what Granat said wouldn't make sense because you do in fact stay usher after death.
Yeah, but that could be durabban.
Yeah. Why do you have to say in his word that? Why do you have to say that it's retroactive though?
Because if it's not retroactive, then it still remains a relative. It has to be retroactive that there never was a relationship. If Zika's Doraisa, then that should maintain the prohibition. Not for the wife's sister, because that's not Lachamisa, but her mother and daughter should be prohibited even Lachamisa. And it's not.
Okay, because your regular mother, after she dies, is usher. So if it was, okay, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. It's a bit short, but there are other mitzvahs ayom to do. Tomorrow night is Rosh Hashanah. Tonight's the last night of the year. Pretty big day. Wish you all a Ksila V'Chasima Tova.